session of the day. Let me introduce to you first Mr. Emanuele Taibi. He is from IRENA, the International Renewable Energy Agency. He has been working the past few years on islands' energy transition, doing the different roadmaps and different studies for islands on their transition to a renewable energy future. He's also almost, I would say, an islander as well. Lived for some time in the Pacific Islands. Worked on energy systems there with the World Bank and with other international organizations. Emanuele, I leave it to you to introduce your panel.
Thank you, Diego. So just for the structure of the session, I'd like to go through a few introductory slides to set the scene, and then we will have an exciting panel discussion with the 4 speakers here. So I'll just go through a few introductory slides before introducing the panel to you. Briefly, IRENA is very happy to be here today co-organizing this panel session with the OTEC Foundation. For those of you that are not familiar with IRENA, we are an intergovernmental organization with over 150 member countries at the moment, and we are mandated to promote all forms of renewables, ocean being one of them. And of course, OTEC is part of that ocean energy family of technologies. Specifically, we've been producing some work on ocean energy almost 2 years ago now, so it would be good to get some update very soon. We try to characterize on one side the technology through what we call technology briefs, and on the other side the patents and more the legal framework for these technologies to come to accelerated deployment. So we have 2 reports available for free online. Just to set the scene a bit further in terms of geographical potential for OTEC as opposed to other marine technologies, we're talking about a very specific kind of resource, a very large resource, but very geographically focused. And this map from the OTEC Foundation is very useful in trying to visualize what we are discussing. So at the moment, the scale of the projects is still relatively small. The potential is very large and is concentrated in this red area that is highlighted here. What we found out 2 years ago, so I think already from this morning discussion there is some interesting update. We found 3 main challenges that remain on the way to get OTEC to an accelerated deployment at a larger scale. First of all is this larger scale, so trying to get some facilities deployed, no matter if commercially or at the pilot or RD&D level, but just to get some operational experience with these facilities at a larger scale. So the 10 megawatt OTEC plant as the next milestone in the technology process. The second one, there's been a lot of work done, and I know that there has been some recent additional work done that some of the speakers today can share with us on the environmental impact. The first lecture this morning was really showing how little we know about the ocean, so this is something that deserves additional science really about what such a larger scale system could have in terms of environmental impact. This shouldn't be a blocking issue, but it should be an area of focus for research. And lastly, financing. As all fuel-less or free fuel renewable technologies, the capex versus the opex is quite on the capex side. So trying to understand what's the best way to finance such large-scale projects, it is crucial to make sure that we get to an accelerated deployment in terms of leveraging the finance that is available out there for renewables, and make sure that this is not only for the usual wind and solar at this stage, but also expanding towards ocean energy technologies. And it was very interesting this morning, the case from the Philippines, where all this has been thought through quite in depth. There was a lot of work done on how to finance such projects, what's the structure of equity and debt, and we are fortunate to have the Dutch Development Bank with us today to share the financial industry view on such projects. We try to give some answer of why such a vast potential still remains limited in terms of deployment. And again, this is 2 years ago, and it would be good to get some updates today on some of the remaining challenges and what can be done to accelerate deployment. It seems that there was and this probably is not true anymore today, slower technology development. It seems that we're coming up with standards, so at this point when we have a standard in place, probably the first point is not true anymore, but it was 2 years ago and the standard is not there yet, so we are solving the first problem maybe. There was a technology optimism. Challenges are more than we thought at the very beginning of OTEC, once you want to get to an industry and scale it up. There seems to be a difference between the perception of technology developers and the perception of policymakers, so bridging this gap is very important. So where we are today and what's left to be done in the next 5 to 10 years is crucial, so to have the same storyline for everyone. And then the challenging macroeconomic environment that has been affecting all renewables in theory. In practice, we've seen that this current lower oil price didn't really affect renewables deployment that much. And last but not least, I think we need to think about a couple of aspects. One is how the scale up will bring down the cost. So the cost today is not going to be the cost tomorrow. And that's the chart on the bottom left side. And on the bottom right side is OTEC has a unique feature that working in island markets can allow to provide more than electricity. There is the seawater air conditioning, there is the aquaculture, and there are several other high value added products that can be associated with an OTEC plant. So the value proposition of a project is not just the cost of the kilowatt hour, but it's all the associated benefits. And I think we're going to try to go through some of these questions now with our panelists. So the next thing I'll do is to introduce to you the 4 panelists for this session and ask all of them to say a few words about what is their role in the OTEC space and where do they see OTEC in the near future evolving. So first of all, to my left, I have Cayocca, the Operation and Quality Manager for Marine Renewable Energy Research and Development Projects at France Energie Marine. The activities include supporting research and development, deployment, partnering, regulation, and education in marine renewables. He is also managing the French Environment and Energy Management Agency, ADEME, participation in the European Marine Renewable Energies R&D funding project, OceanREA-Net. ADEME is active in the implementation of public policy in the areas of environment, energy, and sustainable development. Kelly?
Thank you for inviting me to participate in this panel discussion. I'm here. I have a few hats that I wear. So you mentioned France Energie Marine, working for the ADEME in France. But I was invited today to talk to you a little bit more about the International Energy Association and their involvement in OTEC. So the International Energy Association, IEA, has what they call a TCP, so Technology Collaboration Programs, one of which is OES, Ocean Energy Systems. This particular program has existed since 2001. They work on several topics of ocean energy, so including tidal ocean currents, tidal rise and fall, wave energy, thermal gradients, of course, and salinity gradients. Now, the vision of OES in terms of ocean energy is to have, by the year 2050, a deployment of projects equaling 337 gigawatts, and with this, the creation of some 300,000 jobs. Today, there are 25 members participating in the OES program. In 2016, there were 2 new members who arrived, and we have representatives here from the 2, so France and the European Commission. There are also 8 countries currently invited to join, and they are invited to participate in the meetings to see how they can increase their role in OES before becoming a full member. So, as you may know, there are 2 executive committee meetings per year, one of which was this past week in Singapore. So the OES group was a meeting talking about OTEC, and I'm happy to come today and introduce news that comes from that meeting. There was a task that was proposed in 2015 that wanted to work on OTEC technology and the advancement of the technology and programs. This task was officially accepted. The resolution was accepted in Singapore, so the work will be undertaken. The way this task is being organized is around 2 work groups, one of which is going to be working on the estimation of OTEC potential. So this is not new, but it's hoping to add new information to the discussion. So bringing these member countries around the table to work on collecting available information about the resources and perhaps initiating new measurements. We've seen the image over the past day and a half of the band where OTEC is very possible in the world, and would like to improve on this map and maybe talk more about seasonal variations, things that need to be taken into account as far as the bathymetry, the depth of the water, different issues involved when you want to deploy an OTEC system. So the countries involved in this task are China, India, Korea, Japan, Mexico, Monaco, France, and the Netherlands, and China is leading that work group. And the second work group, quickly, is just going to work on the status and plan of OTEC projects. Now, this was mentioned in the previous discussion by BV, so I think there needs to be a discussion there too about not overlapping this sort of work. But the participating countries would like to deliver a report on OTEC activities that are ongoing and planned, give specific definitions of the work that is involved, and to this end, and to support these two work groups, a seminary is hopefully going to be planned before the end of this year to invite participants to talk about these actions and see who would like to participate and how they can participate to move these forward.
Thank you, Kelly. So the next speaker today is Remy Blocker, is a co-founder of Bluerise. Remy also co-founded No Wires Needed and Avinity Systems, both successful past ventures. A few years back, he became intrigued by the potential of ocean energy and is now dedicated to making Bluerise a success. He holds a bachelor in electrical engineering from Amsterdam Polytechnical cum laude and a master's degree in business in energy systems from Delft University of Technology. Remy.
Thank you. Bluerise obviously also co-host of this OTEC Symposium. We're very proud to be able to do that. It's true that the OTEC market is maybe not as fast as everybody had hoped, but I do see a turning point in that, because only looking at last week's CREF in Miami, the Caribbean Renewable Energy Forum, the main sponsor was an OTEC company. The second gold sponsor was also an OTEC company. And I think what you see is that where, for instance, WAVE was very prominent 10 years ago, and OTEC maybe not so much, things are turning around. And yeah, I'm very hopeful to see commercial systems in the water before 2020, actually, and I think it's up to us to all make that happen.
Wonderful.
Right.
Thank you, Remy. Next speaker is Felix Leinemann, is the head of unit for Maritime Policy, Atlantic, Outermost Regions and Arctic at the European Commission DG Mare. The mission of his unit is to drive forward maritime policy in these regions in order to boost jobs and growth by making the best use of what the sea can offer us while using its potential sustainably. It also works on ensuring wide availability of marine knowledge, research on and measuring the development of the blue economy, promoting innovative technologies for ocean energy and seabed mining, and developing policies for coastal communities to respond to climate change. Felix.
Yeah, thank you very much, and good morning, everyone. So just to give you a bigger picture, ocean energy or marine energy in general in the European Commission fits very well with all the priorities that are currently there: growth, jobs, renewable energy, climate action, and investment, but also competitiveness. The European industry in this area is about half of the world's industry in this area comes from Europe, and this is a competitive advantage that the European Commission wants to promote. We also have our big energy and climate goals to reduce emissions by 40% until 2030, and to reduce them by 80 or 95% by 2050. So there is obviously a big path ahead of us. On ocean energy in general, we see a huge potential. It could, in 2050, provide 10% of Europe's energy demands. OTEC obviously is a very specific area of that, and it's not necessarily something that in mainland Europe is working so well, but it's a huge potential obviously for the EU's outermost regions and their neighbors, and again for European industry. 2 years ago, the European Commission published a communication called Blue Energy, laying out the path that we see for ocean energy and how to promote it best. The communication created an ocean energy forum composed of industry and other stakeholders, the authorities and so on. And for 2 years, this forum worked on a roadmap, which will actually be delivered in 2 weeks' time to the European Commissioner for Environment, Maritime Affairs and Fisheries, Commissioner Vella. And it's a very well-documented analysis of the state of the ocean energy industry and of the way forward. So the industry is proposing what steps should be taken next. Maybe in the discussion I can say a few words about that if we get to that. So I will just stop here. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you, Felix. And finally, we have Clem Bibo for the FMO. It's the Dutch Development Bank. He's a senior investment officer working on Latin America and the Caribbean. FMO supports sustainable private sector growth in developing and emerging markets by investing in entrepreneurs. FMO focuses on 3 sectors that have high development impact: financial institutions, energy, and agribusiness. Alongside partners, FMO also invests in the infrastructure, manufacturing, and services sector. With an investment portfolio of 9 billion euros, FMO is one of the largest European bilateral private sector development banks. Clem?
Thank you, Emanuele. Well, for FMO, OTEC is pretty new, to be quite honest. We have a focus on the energy sector now for more than 10 years. Within FMO, we have more than 30 people working dedicated to energy. Especially the last 5 years, we have been dedicating ourselves especially to renewables. So fossil fuels is mainly out of our scope. I think it's now a bit more than a year ago that we got into contact with Bluerise, discussing potential projects in which we could team up, providing financing. I must say we have to do quite some awareness building still within the organization, within our bank, because nobody actually heard about OTEC or SWAC a year ago. So we are in that process of getting the message across that this is a potential very interesting energy source that we should also be entertaining from the financial side. And I'm very pleased to see the presentation early this morning from the lady from the Philippines, in which I think it looks like a bankable, commercially bankable proposition that's on the table, even though the interest rate that you're looking for is for us at FMO maybe slightly difficult to get or to give. But I think there are instruments out there in the market like the Green Climate Fund, to which FMO is seeking accreditation, which is expected to happen in the next year, which can provide concessional funding at much lower rates. And if we blend it in with FMO's own financing, then that's definitely a proposition that we could entertain. So I think going forward, we would definitely be interested to look at OTEC opportunities that you may have worldwide.
Wonderful, thank you very much. As you can see, we have pretty much all the aspects covered in this panel, and I think we can start going back to the 3 challenges we kind of identified in the past that might be still standing, to see if it's really true that we still have some of these challenges ahead, starting from technology side. So we've seen already some very structured projects coming up in different markets. We've seen some new technological developments. We've seen standards emerging. So I would ask Remy first, from his perspective as a developer, where do you think technology is today, and where do you expect technology to be in 5 to 10 years, provided certain things happen, and which things should happen to get it there?
Well, our opinion is that current state-of-the-art technology is adequate to build the first OTEC plants, and that nothing has to be invented. I think this is echoed, for instance, by the presentation we saw yesterday from Technip, that also acknowledged that, say, a 10 megawatt scale OTEC can be built, with off-the-shelf equipment. Going further, so moving to, say, the 100 megawatt scale, obviously certain elements will still need to be developed. But as it stands, I think 10 megawatt in certain regions is bankable, and therefore I don't see any obstructions not, to build these first, say, 10 megawatt class OTEC platforms. And I think, once we have a few of these in the water, by then the cost curve will be such that bigger regions will open up. Technologies will have been further developed, and then, say, the mass market for OTEC will be ready. So I expect this to sort of happen automatically.
Wonderful. It's very good to have the technology side starting moving towards the market side. So it's really indeed a very specific niche at the moment in islands with higher electricity prices. Yes. But indeed, once you start moving on the learning curve and the prices go down, then there is a huge potential in this same region for markets where the current price of electricity is lower, but where OTEC has a much larger deployment potential. So this is indeed what we really hope would be the geographical deployment pathway of such a technology. So maybe from your perspective, Kelly, the same question, but taken from your role as part of the Ocean Energy Systems implementing agreement.
Well, I think that when we talk about OTEC, it's interesting to go back a little bit and think about the graphs that were presented during many presentations that showed the maturity of technologies. And you would have tidal and wave, et cetera. And I think that OTEC, not that long ago, was almost the forgotten child of ocean energy, was last on the list. And I have the impression today that we're moving up a little bit and maybe even approaching some of these other technologies as far as how well we are, how far advanced we are in the OTEC development process. At the same time, I continually ask myself certain technological questions, and have they been studied, have they been answered? I don't have necessarily the response to the question. But when we talk about these larger platforms, so 10 megawatts, 50 megawatts, 100 megawatts, we need to really start thinking about questions like the export electricity cable, the hydrodynamic studies that need to go into that. We're looking at that now for floating offshore wind, specific studies about how to handle these larger export cables. Is OTEC looking at that too? Are we looking forward to some potential sticking points in that technology? Yesterday we heard from DCNS work about biofouling, which is very important and needs to be taken into account, so not only in heat exchangers, but as well as these export cables, the riser. Also, if you have biofouling occurring, so buildup of biological growth, you're changing the weight that we're talking about of these elements. You're changing the hydrodynamic responses in the water column. So these are very elemental questions that require specific R&D to come up with answers and solutions. So I believe that there's still a lot of work to be done. But at the same time, on the very positive note, with these larger scale projects, 10 megawatt project, hopefully coming online in 2020 or thereabouts, is wonderful news, I think. Another thing to keep in mind is, it was mentioned earlier, the optimism sometimes that is communicated from the industry, because you want to attract investors by saying that we will deploy by such and such date. But you need to be realistic too, because if that does not happen, and we've seen examples of that with other technologies where dates were pushed forward again and again, that you can kind of scare off investors and people who are interested in the technology. I would even bring up a specific example of a case of fishermen in France in discussions about offshore wind development, which has been ongoing in France for a number of years. We still do not have a single turbine in the water yet, but it's going to happen in the very near future. But the Association of Fishermen came back to the people developing these projects and saying, well, 5 years ago you told me that you would have these turbines in the water sooner than is happening now. And you advised me to tell our younger fishermen that maybe they could change employment strategies, maybe work towards getting an education in how to maintain these plants. But now these people have gone through the educational process, but there is no development online in France. So he was not too happy about the fact that promises were made or optimistic forecasts were made and then not kept.
I think it's very important also to start focusing on having a discussion of really the few stumbling issues that remain on the pathway to get this deployment going. And I think platforms like the OES are a very good platform where countries can come together and discuss what do they see as a remaining blocking issue to be resolved, so that R&D efforts can focus on those major issues that are ahead. Changing a little bit perspective from the first point of technology going into the geographical pathway that Remy so well highlighted for us. So at this stage, the prime market is smaller islands, and that goes very well with the scale that is available from industry and goes very well with the higher prices of electricity. So from your perspective, Clem, you're working in the Caribbean. So how do you see the role of islands, in particular, I suppose the Caribbean in this case, in the deployment of OTEC moving forward? So from one side as a market, but from the other side, from the island side, what is the perspective in having these technologies coming to fruition in the next few years?
Yeah, I think it will be very important that there is a adequate policy framework obviously in place, which gives incentives to the developers to develop such technology in the islands. And I think the second point is, yeah, there is obviously now already an energy structure in place with a local utility company, and I think it's important to get those utilities on board as well, to avoid that we are sort of competing or they consider OTEC to be a competing technology which will eat into their revenues. And I think that's another main point to look at. And then obviously in terms of funding, I think we will need to tap into concessional funding, especially in the initial stages whereby the technology is not yet so much developed and generally accepted and understood. Thank you.
But from a risk perspective, how do you see the need for finance to address the technology risk on one side, but also the off-taker risk? So the viability of the utilities as an off-taker in islands as part of your structuring the finance for such a project in say in the Caribbean in general.
Yeah, I think it would be good to have them as a shareholder in the project. Probably better a minority shareholder, but still with a say and a clear role. Mainly, I think it's a matter of getting them on board more than anything else. Yeah. And in terms of what the lady said, in the Philippines, they have this clear feed-in tariff. That's definitely something that will help. We have seen that in the solar PV business as well in the beginning. That a clear feed-in tariff helps to bring in a lot of investors who see relatively attractive returns, and that would be another major point. Yeah.
Thank you. And Remy, from your experience in working with island countries in trying to get the first projects implemented, what do you see the role of islands beyond, of course, the clear pathway you already defined as the prime market at the moment? What is your working experience there in terms of how to engage the islands as partners and how to get these technologies deployed in that context?
Right. Well, islands are like I think all small communities, they are somewhat inward-looking. You need to have your foot on the ground. So a local partner is essential. An outsider on an island doesn't stand a chance. So that's one. I think the other thing that we see is that islands are small, so they lack the big capabilities that we here in Europe or the US have, and so they need to partner up. I think organizations like CARICOM are essential in getting a program for OTEC running in the region. If we want to really scale up, I think left or right you could do some individual projects like we're doing in Curacao and Jamaica, but in order to make it a really big effort, they need to team up. I think they would need some assistance, technical assistance, financial assistance from organizations like the IDB, World Bank, the European Union. I think that would be very beneficial.
Thank you. So talking about key stakeholders in this process, islands is definitely the island government, island utility are key stakeholders, but from the European Commission perspective, what are the other key stakeholders you see in the development and deployment of OTEC moving forward?
Yes, we have obviously the Commission has different departments, and while we in the Maritime Affairs Directorate, we work for the, let's say, more the political ways. We are looking at a process here, and a lot of what is currently happening is still the research stage. So obviously, DG Research and Technological Innovation is one of the main stakeholders for the moment in anything that regards ocean energy and deployment, because that's where the funding, most of the funding comes from. In the roadmap that we will receive in 2 weeks, in the drafts that I've seen, there's also talk, obviously, about how to bridge the gap between the research phase and the commercial or pre-commercial deployment. And I'm happy to hear from Remy that you think everything's there. We don't need to do research. We just need to put it in the water. Because the roadmap might be improved on that part, the draft that I've seen. And that's very good news, I think. But now when we come to that, obviously the next questions are investment. So we have already been in discussions with the European Investment Bank to look into potential funds to be set up, but let's say in maritime affairs we don't have any proper funds of our own. So what one would then look at is more the regional and structural development funds, for example, where one could really tap into the development of some of the outermost regions. Well, another example, I think, which was presented yesterday, I wasn't able to be here, the Nemo project in Martinique is funded by revenues from the auctions of the emission trading system. So there's a European fund, NER 300, which auctions, I think, 300 million permits, and which had a revenue of 2.1 billion euros and funded low carbon energy projects and carbon storage projects in a call for proposal. So Nemo, I think, got about 70 million from this fund, which is not European taxpayers' money, but drawn from the markets, from the emissions trading markets.
You're touching on a very, very important point, which I think is exactly bridging this gap between the research and development phase and the deployment, is what we call in the diffusion of innovation the valley of death, because nobody wants to fund this kind of stage. But there are indeed mechanisms to actually get these projects deployed. There is the Green Climate Fund, there is the NER 300 at the European level, there is some research funds that are going towards deployment rather than just laboratory research. So given the technology seems to be getting to the, let's say, commercial stage, at least in some markets, and the research and development is still being supported, I think it's very crucial to make sure that the deployment pathway doesn't fall in between these two stages, but it gets accompanied to the next level, which is the commercial deployment. And given we have limited time, I think this leads perfectly to the final question, which is pretty much for all of the panelists. What do you think are the key next steps, the million-dollar question, the key next steps for getting OTEC deployment going? What should we do in terms of different stakeholders' roles and key next steps for all of us to work on once we walk away from this room?
I could start. I think the easy answer is we need to get an OTEC platform in the water. If we're talking about the offshore OTEC, it needs to be in the water, it needs to be working, it needs to be proving itself as a technology, and people need to see it functioning. And that brings me to a second point, which is I think that one of the stakeholders, maybe we didn't talk so much about, other users of the maritime space and local inhabitants, there needs to be a very strong effort in the area of education and teaching people what OTEC is, what it can do, hopefully in parallel with the OTEC machine that is actually working offshore, not too far, so we can point to it and say this is what it's actually doing, what it's doing for the local community, as far as jobs, as far as reducing carbon emissions, improving way of life, et cetera, et cetera.
Wonderful. Remy?
I mean, adding to Kelly, I fully agree. I think what we see as a good way to enter the OTEC market is also a combination with SWAC, seawater air conditioning. These are, bankable commercial projects from day one, piggybacking a somewhat larger OTEC than the current, 100 kilowatt pilots. On top of that is what we're actually going to do, which will be the next step in scaling up. I think, Nemo will then be the next big one. Maybe our friends from Bordeaux are able to pull off an even faster track OTEC. But I agree, getting a good system in the water that works and functions as designed is crucial.
Felix?
Yes, taking it from there, maybe one step further, I'm actually not sure, because I'm not so much an expert on OTEC, how much problems there are from the environmental side. But if I look at the broader ocean energy picture, there's also obviously a lot of questions of what kind of impact is this going to have on the environment, what kind of licensing procedures do we have, and we have at least two tools where we think we can contribute from a European level. One is maritime spatial planning, so really to see where for states to set up plans what kind of maritime activities they want to take place in which areas of their coastline, for example, so that certain sites do not clash with fishing activities or shipping routes or aquaculture or what have you. Another aspect is the licensing procedures, because there is no operating facility. It is very difficult to estimate the impacts on the environment. We are currently launching a couple of studies where we want to see typed efforts to see what certain sites are already there. We can see that, and maybe we can extrapolate the effects and then facilitate the licensing procedures by telling, well, this has happened in these waters. If you can, how can you transfer these results to other waters, and then thereby give guidance to the licensing procedures, I think.
Wonderful, thank you. Same question?
Yeah, I think I have very little to add to what has been said. I think we really need some proven showcases that we can show to our credit committee, who is in the end the final hurdle to get any financing approved to us in the development bank. And they always say, okay, it's nice if you have a small pilot that works, but what if you scale it up? So that basically that business case has to be made clear, and that's what we need.
Thank you. We are 30 seconds from the end of the allocated time, so I think we did pretty well. So I think at this stage we can have a few questions, if we are okay with time for that.
The question I have is not for the panelists, but for IRENA. Is that okay?
Sure.
Right. IRENA and the Abu Dhabi Fund had a loan facility for new and innovative, renewable energy projects. And we, EcoPass Sri Lanka, applied for a 10 megawatt project. The project was rejected because the experts said it was new and unproven technology. Now, how do you account for that disconnect between IRENA official position? 3 years ago, you published a paper on OTEC, and your experts saying it is new and unproven technology and rejecting a loan in favor of solar power and waste to energy, which is already old and established.
Okay, so I suppose you're referring to the Abu Dhabi Fund for Development, which is an Abu Dhabi fund, and IRENA is in, let's say, consultative capacity in review of the projects. This is not a facility for, as you say, new innovative technologies, but it's a... Well, to my knowledge, it's for renewables, all of them, indeed. So I think the definition of innovative might be applicable to a certain extent to all renewables and to no renewables. So I think in this specific case, I cannot speak to the advisory board that decided in favor or not for a project. But in general, definitely, there's been a lack of marine energy projects really funded in general, not by IRENA or ADFD or other institutions. There's very little that has been funded, and this is also connected to what Clem just said. The more you get deployment, the more it's easier to finance that. So that has been a pretty basic experience in the renewable space. At the very beginning, rooftop PV was something new to the banks, and customer couldn't get a loan to finance its rooftop PV. Now it's a pretty standard product from most financial institutions. So we really hope that this is going to be the same also for marine energy in the near future.
Frank Newman from Institute for Infrastructure Environment in Brussels. Maybe a suggestion also, it's not more a suggestion than a question, maybe for the Commission. In the report that IRENA made, the technology brief for OTEC, there's reference to a very good study that was made by the United States Environmental Protection Agency. And this was a preliminary assessment of around the world tests and installations in relation to licensing for OTEC. And one aspect that came out, which also I think is very important for the European jurisdiction, is the kind of technology. So if it's more OTEC on land, offshore, and how far offshore. I think this study could provide a lot of inspiration for discussions on licensing of OTEC at European level, particularly also because it identified the lacks of knowledge. But of course, in islands, this type of technology should be also compared to other type of technologies that provide electricity or air conditioning. So, well, you can find the link to this study. I think was very extensive from UCP in the IRENA brief that was made, the technology brief.
Thank you.
Very good. Yeah, we're out of...
So we are 3 minutes beyond time, so I think I would just ask you to join me in thanking the panelists for today. And hand it back to Diego as Master of Ceremony.
Great. Thank you, Emanuele. Yeah, so I was informed we're running a bit behind on time, and there's a new session that's coming up right after. I just want to finish up, 1 second, this is not working, by thanking you all for being here. I think the last 2 days we heard a lot about the technology readiness. We heard from the big industrial players, technology developers as well, into where the status of the technology is. I think Remy summarized it quite nicely into the technology is ready. R&D, of course, should continue like with every technology, but implementation is important, and getting those projects in the water, as we have just heard, is one of the most important things. Financing seems to remain one of the key issues for those first projects. We know that the projects can be bankable, also what we saw from the Philippines. Standards are being developed to make those things happen, but those first projects, the first risk, like the NEMO project is doing, needs to be taken into account. Now, before I close, I want to make an announcement, of course. You've seen this map a few times throughout the sessions. Next year, it is already known where the OTEC Symposium will take place, so thankfully we keep going. We'll see more developments. 5th OTEC Symposium is going to be, this is back, is going to be at the island of La Réunion in France. So there, for those of you that don't know where it is, right in the middle of the map. DCNS, in partnership with the university there, will be hosting next year's symposium. We continue, saw this picture. Again, we want to thank all the volunteers that have helped us for everything. I want to thank all the sponsors, partners, have been mentioned, of course, a few times throughout the conference. And right now we can break for lunch, keep the conversation going, and hopefully let's get some projects in the water soon. Very good. Thank you.